All right, so I have Cristi Vlad with us. He has consented to come on and give us the lowdown on the ketosis and ketogenic diets. He is my go-to expert on that because he has written the books on it. Morning, Cristi.
Morning, Dr. Dan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Why don't we start off by giving kind of a background as to what got you interested in ketosis and ketogenesis?
Well, to be very specific to the ketogenic diet, it was back in 2013 when I actually wanted to, I was kind of fit at the time, but I wanted to lose the last few pounds of fat from my midsection. And I basically looked for different approaches online. And as far as I remember, I think I got to a blog post from Tim Ferriss who was talking about, I think it was Peter Attia who was trying a ketogenic diet back then. So he was also advocating it. So I decided to try it, and at the same time took a lot of measurements in terms of body composition, in terms of blood analysis, in terms of food logs, and tracking exercise. And that's how I decided to basically put everything into a book format after the experiment ended. So it was between late September 2013, I think, until December. So
yeah, I think that's when I first kind of connected with you. Is I was following your progress online. You were in the biohacking community, and you kept posting pictures of your progress online, and it was pretty impressive what you were achieving with it.
Yeah, I mean, I reached my desired, I guess, purpose for it. So it was a successful experiment.
So what did your body fat do? What was the progress from start to really where you were satisfied with the results?
Well, the first DEXA that I took got me to 19 something. It was 19.5, I think, body fat percentage. And then the second one that I took at the end of the experiment, if I can call it like that, it was like 14.4. So
nice. How'd the muscle mass do during that time?
I think it got a little bit improved, but I'm not sure exactly on the accuracy of DEXA scans in terms of muscle fluctuations. I'm not sure if it's really precise.
Yeah.
But I mean, comparing those two DEXA scans, I think it got a little bit improved, but I can look it up.
Yeah, we've seen actually pretty good results with fat loss and muscle gain during the ketogenic diets that we've had people on. So we've had really good results with it. I think one of the biggest things was in cognitive performance. I think most of the people that I've had do the ketogenic diet really felt like a better clarity, better focus, almost like a nootropic effect with the ketones.
Well, definitely, yeah. I mean, that's probably one of the most, I would say, benefits, the most like observable, subjectively observable benefit that I got from the ketogenic diet. So I could compare my mental performance before that with what I have when I was kind of under strict ketosis. So definitely I had like higher mental clarity. I could like start working on something like writing something, and I could focus all the way through like for a couple of hours without actually with little disturbances. Like I wouldn't have the like a rush to try to get into other things at the same time. So I wouldn't divert my focus.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself slightly ADD?
Well, it depends. I think you could manipulate the state. Basically, I could consider myself an ADD if I have a lot of caffeine.
Okay. Now, I have tried ketogenic in a sense. I mean, I went paleo back in 2007 probably, and stayed paleo for a long time. And I had periods where I feel like I was probably in ketosis. But why don't you talk to us about the difference between a diet that is more of a ketogenic diet versus one that's more of a paleo style? I mean, where do you draw that line, and how do you establish that?
Well, there are a lot of variations of low carbohydrate diets, but if we talk about a ketogenic diet and someone wants to undergo a ketogenic diet, I think one of the most important things they have to do is to actually measure ketosis.
Right.
So otherwise you wouldn't know. There are like subjective measures of ketosis, like the feeling of having a certain type of breath, like acetone breath, but that's not a good quantifiable approach. So basically you'd have to measure ketosis, and one of the cheapest ways to do it would be using like ketone strips. These are like urine strips that you buy at the local pharmacy for, I don't know, $10 for 50 tests. But
now, I found that the keto strips could be really not that good for following ketosis. I mean, what's your experience with that? The data I've seen on the keto strips themselves have been kind of not the best.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I could still measure urine ketones after being in ketosis for a long time. So I don't know. To me, they were pretty accurate, but they actually measure acetoacetate. So
right. But see, if you're burning a lot of ketones, you're also going to reduce the amount that's going to be excreted in the urine. Isn't that right?
Well, so the circulating form of ketone is beta hydroxybutyrate. That's what travels from the liver to the site where it is actually being turned back into acetoacetate and then used for energy. And then, so it's further broken down into acetyl-CoA and then used for energy. So
but once it goes to ketone, then it doesn't go back, right? I mean, you've got that kind of beta hydroxybutyrate, and then it can go back and forth between an acetyl-CoA, and yet if it goes into ketones, then it's kind of done, right?
Well, it could spontaneously, acetoacetate could either go beta hydroxybutyrate. So that's basically in the liver. Ketogenesis is the formation of acetoacetate from acetyl-CoAs.
Right.
So then acetoacetate can be turned to beta hydroxybutyrate and delivered to tissues and reconverted back to acetyl-CoA, or it can spontaneously decarboxylate and be excreted via the breath.
And that's in the form of the ketone, right?
Yeah, acetone. Okay. That's basically acetone. You excrete it as acetone. But getting back to the main question, well, probably the better way to measure ketosis would be using a blood meter. So that measures beta hydroxybutyrate.
Yeah, and I've had most of my clients that end up going with trying the ketogenic diet. I have them get the finger stick You can get them on Amazon. The machines are cheap, but the testing strips are expensive. They're like $5 a strip or something, aren't they? But what I do is I have them kind of do it a couple times a week, just to see what their morning ketones are. And have you tested that against the keto strips?
No, I have not.
That would be interesting to see how the correlation is there.
Yeah, I think there have been people in the quantified self community and also in the ketogenic forums that have tested them. And I don't know. I haven't looked into the data to see how they correlate, but I think that if you want to be extremely precise, you would use the blood meter, and you would use it for a few times once you know what gets you into ketosis, and once you can correlate your subjective measures like better mental performance. Maybe this doesn't happen in everybody, so maybe not everyone who goes on a ketogenic diet can report the same benefits that the rest of the people who are successful on the diet report. So you would then be able to correlate the reading you're getting from the blood with your subjective measures, whatever they are. So then you wouldn't have to test as often if you remain within the certain eating the same foods and
right. Yeah. And $5 a day gets expensive for the testing.
Yeah, and I think it should probably get cheaper, but I don't know. I mean, that's how much it cost in 2014. So
yeah,
it still didn't get cheaper.
Now, I have a lot of people that will think that by doing low carb, they're doing ketogenic, and that's just not the case, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think one of the most important things, like I said, is to measure. Once you measure and you see, blood beta hydroxybutyrate is a very good measure of ketosis. So if your reading is above 0.5 millimolar, that means that you're basically in nutritional ketosis.
Now, what do you recommend as far as a dietary macronutrient mix for people that are wanting to try ketosis?
Well, the basic idea is that you would reduce carbohydrates. So reducing carbohydrate to a level to allow for fat oxidation to increase, and that it would start ketogenesis. So that probably depends on an individual basis. But a good start would be like trying to reduce carbohydrate to say 50 grams per day, total carbohydrates. And then do that for a couple of days and start measuring ketosis, to see if that level of carbohydrate reduction is sufficient to trigger ketosis.
Now, if you're not getting a certain percentage of fat in as part of that macronutrient mix, like I said, I have a lot of people that'll think they can just go on low carb and they're good, but then they'll eat 220 grams of protein, and they'll kind of go through gluconeogenesis in the liver with the protein, and so they're actually increasing the amount of glycogen that they already have. And so they're not getting into ketosis. So I usually have them do a higher fat percentage along with the low carb.
Well, yeah, since you reduce carbohydrates, you have to kind of increase another macronutrient to basically meet your caloric needs for the day. So some people can do higher protein with the same reduction of carbohydrates and some fat and remain in ketosis, I don't know, maybe up to 100 something grams of protein per day and still remain in ketosis. And you can, and the basic ketogenic diet is actually to increase fat, to meet your caloric needs with the increase in fat intake.
Does it matter the types of fat, whether it's saturated versus polys versus monos?
I'm not really sure about this, but the idea would be to kind of eat food. So, like, not try to be unreasonable and consume fat, as in oiling your coffee or throwing butter at it. And I kind of don't like this.
Yeah, me too. I'm a big fan of avoiding the bulletproof coffee. Tried it for a while, and man, it did not work for me at all.
Well, I personally tried it once or twice, but I don't know. It seemed kind of odd to see oil getting to the top of my coffee, and I don't know. It seemed odd, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, I actually gained abdominal fat when I tried going bulletproof, and it was just not. It didn't work for me, and I've had several people it didn't work for, but I still have some that really, really rave about it. But with doing a lot of genetic analysis, we run into several people that don't do well with high fat diets, especially saturated fats. So. If we see somebody with an ApoE4, I mean, just that ApoE enzyme is going to be transferring fats through membranes and across channels in the brain, and can result in a great deal of inflammation. But we've also had people that we could use less saturated fat and use more monos and omega-3s. Not truly get them into ketosis, but I think there are some genetic markers that we should really watch to avoid recommending ketogenic diets for people as well.
Did you look at their blood profiles at the same time?
Yeah, typically when they're an ApoE4, if we have them on a high fat diet, especially saturated fats, their numbers go really high, especially with the bad particle counts as well.
Okay, so what about triglycerides?
Triglycerides on the ApoE4s, they tend to go up, not excessively. I mean, we're talking like mid 200s on the high fat diet. But not to the point where, I've seen some people with an ApoE2 that will go up to 400 on a high fat diet, which is not really that big of a deal. It's just they're not converting into the LDL. So they tend to maintain a low total cholesterol, low LDL, but elevated triglycerides. And that generally is not something that I get too concerned about in that situation. The ApoE3/3s are the ones that tend to do really well with the ketogenic diets, though.
Okay.
I don't know if you've had any experience with people talking about that on the forums or anything like that.
Well, I didn't actually really look into it too much, so I cannot say a lot about it.
Yeah, I mean, with the Alzheimer's risk and the heart disease risk associated with ApoE4, I'm just very cautious about recommending the ketogenic style diet for that group of people, and that makes up 25% of the population.
It's probably better not recommending it if you made these observations based on the cases that you've gone through.
Yeah, and most of the time when we're looking at a ketogenic diet, because ketogenic diets are not easy to follow. I mean, let's be honest about it. I mean, it takes work to really focus on that. Most of the people who have done that are people that are very interested in really aggressive weight loss, fat loss predominantly, or they're endurance athletes that want to really improve their performance. Because, let's face it, a keto adapted athlete that's an endurance athlete is a rock star.
Jeff Volek did a study on ultra adapted athletes, and they published the study. I think it was 2015 when so I think it was December 2015 when they released the results. It was pretty insightful. Not also I know that some bodybuilders also use ketogenic diets when they are in a cutting phase. So when they are trying to lose body fat. So yeah, it's kind of restrictive, but at the same time, I think there are a lot of, especially nowadays, there are a lot of foods and also alternatives that you could have on a ketogenic diet that are substitutes of higher carbohydrate foods, like different flours to, for example, if you want to cook I don't know, cake or something, you could use different flours that are ketogenic friendly, like the same thing people do with pizzas. They use, instead of wheat flour, they use like some nut flours, and I think you get the point.
Yeah. So more of the almond flours and things like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. What are your thoughts on like the keto bars? I know there's a lot of people capitalizing on the ketogenic craze, and they're promoting all these supplement bars. You know, here we are in this paleo world, and you know, everybody labels everything paleo, and yet you go through
that's not the point. Yeah.
Right. You go through the conference and everything is a manufactured food.
Well, what do I think about it? Well, the idea of a ketogenic diet would be to try to not to try to eat food, basically, not a lot of supplements and a lot of meal replacements and a lot of bars. It's not that I'm against it, especially if you're a healthy person. If you're a healthy person, you can consume whatever you want as long as your blood profile remains constant and remains good. You could eat whatever you want as long as you are also satisfied with your body composition. But if you want to use a ketogenic diet to lose body fat, you should try to start by consuming food. And if you see there's progression there, keep doing it. If you don't, try to change some of the variables. Yeah.
Well, how on that line? What about keto salts? You know, I know Peter Attia and those guys really promote the use of keto salts to boost ketosis.
Well, I'm not sure if Peter promotes that.
Maybe it's Dom D'Agostino that was really pushing that one, I think.
Well, Peter Attia experimented, from what I know, with some of those exogenous ketones, but it was only at the level of experimentation. My opinion about this is that, I don't know, it's not that I'm completely against them, but I wouldn't use them. You should, if you want to, the basic idea behind a ketogenic diet for weight loss is carbohydrate restriction. So
right now, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to kind of shift to an area that's a little bit controversial when it comes to this, and I know our coaches are going to get a lot of questions about this. So any insight you can give would be wonderful. But there is a huge kind of thing in the collective right now about using a ketogenic diet to slow the progression of cancers. And I know the theory behind it is, you know, cancer cells typically use glucose for metabolism. And, you know, the theory behind it is you starve the cancer cells by going on a ketogenic diet because you don't supply the circulating glucose for them. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Or do you have any insight into that?
Well, there's a hell of a lot to say about this. First of all, the view that cancers are glycolytic, are only glycolytic, is extremely simplistic.
Right.
And it often I don't know. I see it coming from people who actually don't really look at the big picture, which is extremely, extremely complex when it comes to cancers. And if you talk about, if you want to talk strictly metabolically, yes, there are cancers that are more glycolytic than others, but there are cancers that can adapt to using different substrates. And there are cancers that even can exploit autophagy
Yeah.
for further progression. I'm not sure if you've read the the most cited two papers on cancer, on the hallmarks of cancer, which was, the first one was written in 2001, and the second one was in 2011 by Hanahan and Weinberg.
I have seen that. I've seen some excerpts from those, but I haven't actually read the studies.
I think I did a summary of the last one, so
Well, maybe it was on some of your material that I actually read that then.
possibly. So one of the points is of the acknowledgement the acknowledgement of the Warburg effect, but the rest of the points kind of get you the idea that this is an extremely complex issue, and it shouldn't be viewed strictly metabolically as some people try to promote it, because it's much more than that. And it gets even worse if when you dial in metastases, which it's one of the biggest dilemmas, I think.
Well, and one of the aspects that I explain to people is that even though you're ketogenic does not mean you lose all your glycogen stores, and it doesn't mean you don't have circulating glucose. I mean, when we go on a ketogenic diet, we have that initial drop in serum blood glucose, but then it stabilizes and it stays there. I mean, even if you're in full starvation.
That's right. Yeah, glycogen remains constant, and it, as you said, after the initial drop, your body probably gets used to. It's gonna be replenished to a certain point.
Yeah.
Like a physiologic normal point. Like you wouldn't run completely glycogen depleted when you're in a ketogenic diet, because once you've when you go from a higher carbohydrate diet to a ketogenic diet, that's probably when you drastically lose a lot of glycogen in the initial few days. But until your body dials back to like a functional range, then after that you probably the point that I'm trying to make is that you don't run glycogen depleted.
Right.
Despite the fact that you're not consuming carbohydrates.
Right. And I think that's a common myth that people have when they're thinking that they're going into ketosis. Now, from your experience, I mean, how long, let's say somebody decides they want to go on a ketogenic diet and they reduce their carbohydrates to 50 grams or less a day. How long do you typically see someone shifting? Does it have to do with how much glycogen they have stored, or is it pretty standard?
How long until they basically reach ketosis?
Right.
Well, this also depends on an individual basis, but I would say that a couple of days. Most people can reach ketosis in a couple of days. Some people even faster, because let's say that you have 1,500 to 2,000 calories stored as glycogen, and you would deplete that in about 2 or 3 days if you eat a normal ketogenic diet, I think. And then the upregulation of ketogenesis, it all happens basically. It's not like there's glycogen depletion up to a certain point, then there's increased fat oxidation from there on. They kind of mix together somehow. So they kind of can't find the word.
So you're talking about the transition from
Yeah,
ketosis to
it's
keto
not
adaptation, right?
it's 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 not like they happen individually. So getting back to the main point, it takes a couple of days for most people to reach ketosis. If
And
it,
what you were getting at was the keto adaptation state, which is where they're actually, I mean, there's a difference between having that ketosis in the blood and getting the body adapted to that keto adaptation, correct?
well, keto adaptation would basically mean that the body is very efficient to being in the state of ketosis. So it kind of got used to the state of ketosis. That
Mm-hmm.
probably means that you would have to maintain the state of ketosis for, I don't know, a long time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's a really strict, or if there should be a really strict definition of keto adaptation, because
I've seen some variations on what people classify as the keto adaptation. I've seen where they say when the heart transitions from using the glucose over to using the fatty acids or the ketones as the primary source.
no, the heart, from what I know, the heart primarily uses fatty acids for energy.
Right, but it still uses a percentage of that glucose, and then when it becomes that kind of all-inclusive part, as well as the brain, which is predominantly glucose, can actually keto adapt.
So it's probably, I don't know. So if we talk about keto adaptation and how long it takes, we have to, and I don't think we can specifically quantify this, because it would be in terms of the upregulation of enzymes and other factors that would support ongoing ketogenesis. And like I said, I'm not sure if we can quantify this, but we could say that keto adaptation is when you maintain a state of ketosis, like trying to maintain it constantly.
I saw one study, and it wasn't a TIA's study. It was the other one you mentioned on keto adaptation.
A Volex's study?
Volek's study, yeah, where he had shown that the time to exhaustion on the treadmill in the initial phase of ketosis, they dropped to 80% of max. But then after, I think it was 2 weeks, they were 155% of their initial as far as time to exhaustion with that. And I think that's what they were kind of classifying as that keto adaptation state. Are you familiar with that?
Actually, not quite. So I don't think I can say much about that. Did they actually look into the RQ of the...
Yeah, and there was a substantial difference between that 1 week into ketosis from the initial, and then at that 2 week point where they said that they were measuring RQ and they were measuring time to failure.
Okay, well, actually, if you try to dial up nutrition, and it probably doesn't take that long to be adapted to the state of ketosis. I'm not sure if there are extra benefits if you're in ketosis for, let's say, 2, 3, 4 weeks or 2 or 3 months, and if you try to remain ketonic like for 6 months. I'm not sure if there is a big difference between someone who's been ketonic for 3 weeks to someone who's been ketonic for 6 months.
Yeah.
I haven't looked into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you hit that state, your RQ kind of gets established, but you got to get through that initial phase of it to get to that efficiency state.
Yeah, and that might be difficult for some people coming from a higher carbohydrate nutrition, uh, because you have to understand that you're doing something that's different from what you've been doing so far. So, like trying to go the opposite direction, trying to limit certain foods, it might be a bit difficult, but the goal, if you have a certain goal in mind, it should be achievable.
I wanted to share this picture because this is always something that I like to show the keto adapted athletes. This one here, which is talking about how much calorie reserve if you're a glycogen burner, an athlete that's in burning glycogen, versus how much reserve you have for energy when you're in a ketogenic or keto adapted state.
Well, yeah, that's a really good one. And there's another important point that I should make here. And from what I've observed, aside of the subjective higher mental performance, I would say, it was the reduction in hunger. So
yeah,
the complete reduction, if I can call it like that, in hunger. That was one of the like subjective experiences that I got after being ketonic for a certain time. So
did you notice a change in your calorie intake? I mean, total calories for the day when you went into a ketogenic diet?
Well, I remained kind of within the same limit. So I tried to remain within the same limit of calories. So,
okay.
But to me, it's much easier to restrict calories with ketosis.
Yeah, I found the same experience.
And with intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Because with intermittent fasting, you impose further restriction to yourself. And if you only limit your caloric intake to a certain time frame of the day, and you try to be consistent with that, it's kind of easy to calorically restrict. So these are basically good tools for people who want to lose weight. I'm not sure if intermittent fasting is good for someone who wants to like gain a lot of muscle.
I've actually had good experience with muscle gain on intermittent fasting. I do intermittent fasting. I've been doing it for about 5 years. So I don't eat my first meal until usually noon or 1 o'clock. And
I'm not saying it's not possible.
Yeah,
it is, but to optimal, I'm not sure. So like for bodybuilders who want to maximize.
Well, so I mean, what you're looking at you're activating AMP-K, so you're going to inhibit mTOR, and theoretically, you're not going to be able to build muscle. Although, I've seen some studies on this with using metformin glucophage. That's it's a pretty strong inhibitor or activator of AMP-K and inhibitor of mTOR, but they have not shown in that situation that it really impacts muscle gains as much. I mean, I have to admit it's harder to gain muscle when you're doing it, but it doesn't completely eliminate the ability.
That's right. So. Yeah. So we're not talking in absolutes.
Right.
We're talking in proportions.
Right.
I would be interested into looking in the study you mentioned. Did they have body composition data with body composition changes with metformin in terms of muscle progression?
I'll have to look. It's been a while since I read the article because I had a lot of people asking me about it when we use a lot of metformin in our clinical practice. And some people, we were leaning more towards berberine to elevate the AMP-K because it has less of an impact on mTOR for some reason. But Yeah, I'll see if I can find that for you.
Okay. Do you know of any measure for like any marker to quantify the upregulation of AMK?
I don't. That's the one thing I don't know if we have an actual biomarker that we can measure
Uh, I
in the
don't
clinical
think there
setting.
is, but
Yeah.
it would be great if we can,
Yeah.
if we get into that.
Well, I don't want to keep you all morning, but I do want to have you mention your books and how people can get access to them.
Well, the one that's specific to my ketogenic journey is Ketone Power. So that's available on Amazon. And the one that's a combination of ketosis and intermittent fasting, that's also available on my Amazon profile page. So
Okay.
anyone who's interested can get them there.
And his name's easy. It's Cristi Vlad, CRISTI VLAD. So easy to find him on the search on Amazon. And he is a member of the Genomic Gurus. So if you guys have any questions, I'm sure he would be happy to chime in. He's always a great contributor to the group.
Definitely.
So, Cristi, thanks for coming on and doing this. It's going to be very valuable for all of our coaches.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Dan.